They say the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and over again and expecting a different response. How can we know if we're doing the same thing over and over again if we think history is boring, something to be ignored outside of school? History. Welcome to Into the Desert, exploring the wilderness of ideas. Don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button. And if you want to support our channel and our mission of encouraging discussion and not division, please join us on Patreon. Link is in the description. George Santayana says, those who cannot learn from history are doomed to repeat it. How important is it, Elgin, for us, the average person, to learn history?
Well, democracy requires a knowledge of history. It requires voters, and voters have to be informed. If we don't know what happened before, how can we know if we're repeating failed policies that have happened in the past? So the citizens have to be informed. They have to make informed decisions. Unless you think you can just randomly pick issues, it'd be like flipping a coin and letting that decide what we should do for social policy. Should taxes go higher? Should taxes go lower? Flip a coin, let's see what it comes out to. Or maybe we can look at history, see what the effects have been, and then decide what we should do. Obviously, the latter is the most important, but how do you do that if you don't know history? If you don't know what happened before, how can you know whether you should do this or do it again? We had some funny videos over the weekend with July 4th. People were being asked, who do we rebel from and how old is the country? You laugh when the people don't know obvious answers, that we rebelled from England and the country is 249 years old. That one person, the country next year will be 250. How old is it today? 50?
What age did it turn this year?
Next year, America is 250. So this year, America is...
I'm not sure.
249.
50.
America turned 50.
Yeah.
So if you don't know where we came from, you don't know how we got here, you don't know what they did, how can you tell if what we're doing is right, or if we're on the right track or the wrong track, or are we even making good decisions? So citizenship requires citizens to be informed. It requires people to make good decisions, and decisions are going to require history.
And our founding fathers, they learned from history. They were all very extremely proficient. Well, maybe not all, but as a general rule, they were very proficient in political history and systems. What worked, what didn't work. They even learned from their previous attempts, from the colonies, from the Continental Congress, from the Articles of Federation. They used political writings like Common Sense by Thomas Paine. They used philosophers like Locke and Montesquieu to create political systems that worked with human nature. And they built a system that uses the inconsistencies, the fallacies, the mistakes, the weaknesses that we make to create a society that can prosper despite our flaws and our mistakes.
Well, you have other examples in history. World War I, you had the Treaty of Versailles, and it's pretty generally agreed now that the provisions that put on Germany were so onerous that they destabilized the entire country, made it difficult for the government to function correctly, and as a result, they ended up in World War II. They also had the issue of, following World War II, people looked back at the Allies looked back at the history of World War I, and they didn't want to repeat that same mistake. And so they came up with other programs like the Marshall Program and trying to get both Japan and Germany back on their feet so we wouldn't be fighting another war. And they were actually fairly successful at that part of history. So you look back in history, there's plenty of examples of both good and bad. And, Germany is also an example of a bad decision.
Yeah, the German Republic, Weimar Republic, they had two major mistakes because they were trying to create a pure democracy, and they used, like Article 17 was proportional representation. And the first part of it is great. It's, let me quote it, the representative body must be elected by a universal, equal, direct, and secret suffrage of all German citizens of either sex according to the principles of proportional representation. But that second part, that proportional representation, really caused problems. They had 50, 60 parties that they're trying to proportionally represent.
Yeah, well, they should have learned from history, because of the pure democracies of ancient Greece and other attempts at democracies failed because pure democracy doesn't work very well. I know a lot of people criticize the two-party system and they lament about the two-party system, but the thing about a two-party system is it brings stability. Multiple parties bring instability, and it also tends to promote the fringe elements, because you have to cater to the fringe elements to get them to be part of your coalition. So the fringe elements end up with a lot more power than they would normally have, and they can actually win elections that they would never win in a more two-party system.
And then we add on top of that their second mistake, which is Article 48. And I won't read that one because it's very complicated, but it basically says that whoever's in power, the president, the government leader, they can suspend government. They can basically declare this martial law type state that says, I am all in control and all powerful and I can do whatever I want. And there's nothing to stop that.
And a lot of precedent went into that. It was repeatedly invoked. And then finally Hitler, a minor party, was able to rise to majority status, win an election, and then once in office declare martial law, and eventually basically destroy the Weimar Republic and create the Third Reich. So the mistakes that were embedded into the Weimar Constitution, along with the overpressure of the Treaty of Versailles, resulted in the rise of Hitler and Nazism. So it's like they did not learn from the past, and therefore we suffered World War II.
Yeah. And I know a lot of people think that our current government is leading down that same role. A lot of people say Trump is going to be another Hitler and he's a dictator. But one of the biggest differences that I think people ignore when they think about our government is that our government has a system of checks and balances. So, yes, the president has executive powers that may seem to be similar to this executive power from Article 48. But the biggest difference is the legislative and the judicial branches have the ability to go in and say, no, you
they
can't
can check
do that.
that power.
Yes.
Which is where we get the whole concept of checks and balances. A lot of the political debates we see going on in the news today are literally battles over where those exact lines are. What does the exact power of the presidency? What is the exact power of the courts? What is the exact power of the legislature? And one of the interesting things is that when they wrote the Constitution, the legislature was the most important branch. But the legislature has sort of decided that, well, it's kind of hard to take risky votes. So we're going to push that power back to the presidency and the courts. And that's one of the instabilities we currently have in our system, is that the people that are actually supposed to be making decisions don't really want to make the decisions because it might interfere with their election. And
now we're seeing that in New York, right? For example, New York Mayor, socialist Zoran Mamdani, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. So people look at what he's proposing and they're like, wow, this is great. I'm looking forward to it. And it sounds great. I mean, equal rights and sharing everything and making sure everything is fair. It sounds great. Unfortunately, detractors and those of us who understand history say, we've tried that and it's not working. This doesn't work. You cannot make this work.
Yeah. We'll take, for example, his rent freeze. lots of countries down through history have tried various forms of rent freezes or price controls or whatever. And the historical record's pretty clear. They fail. They succeed in one sense. You can freeze the price of an apartment or a house or whatever, but all you do is constrict supplies. And so I remember, hearing about stories in the 80s and 90s about these people bragging about how they had rent controlled prices on Central Park for extremely inexpensive values because the prices were price controlled. Thing is nobody could actually get an apartment. If you were a rich movie star or you had lots of connections, you could get a very good price controlled apartment. But if you're just an average person that needs a house, they're not gonna have a chance, because that's what price controls do. They may limit the price, but they also constrict the market. And so if you're one of those lucky few that actually already has an apartment or has a place to live, then you're set. But if you're the average person trying to find a home, you're not gonna be able to find it.
No, and it leads to a lot of corruption and people who bend or break the rules depending on how you look at it, to say, oh, well, my uncle had it, and so I'm going to take it over, but I'm going to keep my uncle's name even though he died 3 years ago so I can keep this rent control apartment. You have the same thing with Section 8 and low-income housing. You go into a highly populated city like, Southern California, New York, Chicago, Portland. Section 8 housing has waiting lists, and it can take you years to get on it. And what are you going to be, homeless until you can get Section 8 housing? And then the housing is usually not very nice. It's not maintained because they can't afford to keep up the maintenance to a certain level that would make it nice to live in, because it's too cheap rent. I showed a report earlier this week that there are a large number of apartments sitting empty in New York because they need to be repaired before they can be lived in, but the landlord can't afford to do the repairs because the rents won't cover the expense of the repairs. So rather than repair them and rent them out, they sit there empty because it's not worth putting the money into it to make them livable and habitable. Yeah. And I think, to me, that's my biggest issue with socialism. As nice as it sounds, I don't think it doesn't take into account the personal mentality, our flaws and the way of living. We don't live in a utopian society. We don't have utopian ideals. People aren't going to sacrifice themselves for the greater good unless there's some reason that pushes them personally to do that. And socialism doesn't account for that. It doesn't provide that motivation. And so therefore it fails. So let us know what you think down in the comments. Do you think that we don't need to learn from history? It's boring. It's something to be forgotten. It's not relevant to today. Or is it something that we really should be paying more attention to? Does it really have some valid usage in how we handle today's problems? Let us know what you think in the comments. And if you made it this far in the video, consider watching one of our other videos and supporting our channel down on Patreon. Thanks again for watching Into the Desert, exploring the wilderness of ideas.